Every so often, a game comes along that is so ambitious. It feels destined to either change the industry
or fail spectacularly.
There is often no middle ground. These are the projects that try to be everything for everyone, and in doing so, they walk a very thin line between genius and disaster. And right now, the best candidate for that title is a game called Ananta. You probably know it better by its original codename, Project Mugen. It is a free-to-play urban open-world RPG that, on paper, looks like the dream game for millions of people. But the closer you look, the more complicated the picture gets. Ananta is a paradox. It has some of the slickest, most impressive marketing we have seen in a long time, yet its development history is long and troubled. It promises a world with a staggering level of detail and interactivity, but its core combat in early tests has been described as fundamentally slow and boring, and it made a massive industry-shaking decision on how it makes money while being backed by a publisher notorious for the exact opposite. This game is a project of the highest highs and potentially the lowest lows, which makes it one of the most fascinating stories in gaming at the moment. So today we're going to break it all down. We will look at the incredible promise the developers sold us, compare that to the reality players found in the first test, and dive into its complicated history to understand why it is in this state. Finally, we will analyze the massive gamble it's taking that could either solidify its place in history or not be enough to save it. Well, on the surface, the pitch was simple enough for anyone to get. It was the anime-style GTA fantasy, a concept that a huge part of the gaming world has been waiting for, fusing the sprawling freedom of a Western sandbox with a polished anime aesthetic that dominates the Eastern market, and a huge pool of waifus that dominates me. The trailers themselves were masterfully done. They sold a feeling of a vibrant, sun-drenched city full of life and the ability to move through it without limits. Here, they made a very deliberate design choice. In most open-world games, you run, you climb, and then you get tired. A little bar runs out and you have to stop. Oh, how sad. Ananta's core promise was getting rid of that. No stamina bar for traversal. You could run, swing, and climb continuously, and even utilize a full range of vehicles, from cars and motorcycles to taxis, buses, subways, and even helicopters. Some characters even have their own unique methods, like the mascot character Taffy, whose giant mallet can transform into a rideable bike. It sounds like a small detail, but it was fundamental to the fantasy of uninterrupted freedom they were selling. The promise also went deeper than just movement. It was about the world you were moving through. The goal was to build a digital playground, a place you could simply exist in. Outside of the main story, the trailers made it clear that you could play street basketball, find a table for mahjong, or hit the gym for some fitness activities. There is even a role system, which would allow players to take on jobs like police officer, hacker, or delivery person. Since most people don't have jobs now, you could get a job in-game, you know what I'm saying? And all of this is paired with unique gameplay and a fully fledged, wait for it, dating systems with locations like amusement parks and arcades, complete with dialogue choices and character affection levels. I might not be brave enough to talk to a woman in real life, but I'll be a Chad in game. They also promised a world with systemic chaos, where things just happen. You could be walking down the street, and a gang clash might break out of the corner, completely separate from you, giving the illusion of a living city. Even the combat was pitched with the same level of freedom, encouraging you to use the city itself as a weapon. You can pick up trash bins and golf clubs to fight with. On top of that, the whole team could equip powerful shared abilities like telekinesis or large-scale crowd control. And to really lean into that sandbox fantasy, they showed gameplay where players could handcuff and arrest random NPCs. It was a direct nod to the kind of unrestrained player freedom that defines the genre. So you have the movement of Spider-Man, the chaos of GTA, some elements of Watch Dogs, and life sim elements all rolled into one ambitious checklist. And then when you think you have the game figured out, you see a man escaping from the police on a robotic walking toilet. That single moment was important. It signaled that Ananta had its own bizarre, almost absurdist sense of humor. The hype this vision generated has been immense, with a global pre-registration number recently surpassing 11 million, especially after the release of their latest gameplay trailer. We expect to see more from their showing at the Tokyo Game Show, which we will be covering, so consider subscribing if you don't want to miss that video. The vision they presented was clear: an ultimate sandbox with endless freedom and a strange personality. On paper, it was nearly perfect. The question always is, however, can the reality of playing the game live up to the trailer? Well, the new footage gives us a much clearer answer to that. That question was largely answered in January of this year with an exclusive offline technical test. This was the first real look behind the curtain, and the feedback was sharply divided between what worked and what was deeply flawed. First, the good news: the traversal, the swinging, and the parkour was validated. Players reported that the core movement was functional and satisfying. A huge part of the game's identity was built on this feeling of freedom, and it seems they delivered. The depth of the sandbox, however, got almost absurd. Testers found you could literally snatch a phone out of an NPC's hand and read their extensive chat histories. The city cinemas weren't just decorative buildings. You could go inside, and they would reportedly play actual short films made by university students. This incredible level of detail showed a clear priority on making the world a believable interactive place. Now, previously, this is where we would talk about the combat. The fast-paced, exhilarating combat shown in the early trailers was reportedly nowhere to be found, with players describing it as lackluster and painfully slow. The promised abilities like telekinesis were present, but testers noted it felt more like a gimmick that did minimal damage. For an action RPG, this was a major problem. However, the recently released official extended gameplay trailer shows a very different story. The combat now looks significantly more dynamic, fluid, and impactful. We see fast-paced character action, seamless switching between multiple characters, and explosive abilities being used effectively. The trailer features intense vehicle combat and high-octane chase sequences that look genuinely exciting. While we still need to wait for further player tests to confirm the feel, visually the combat has been drastically improved, addressing much of that initial criticism and appearing far closer to the exhilarating experience promised. But the biggest issue, the single most critical red flag from that test, was the optimization, how well the game runs. And this wasn't on average hardware. We are talking about top-of-the-line PCs. Even on these powerful computers, players reported severe performance issues. During real-time cutscenes, the frame rate would just plummet into the single digits, becoming a slideshow. Sometimes the game would just crash entirely. We now know the likely reason for this. The cutscenes are designed to reflect the player's current character customizations in real time, a feature that is incredibly demanding on hardware. This immediately raised the most important question for the project's future. If a high-end gaming PC is struggling this badly, how is this game supposed to run on a PlayStation 5, let alone the millions of different phones it is supposed to release on? Here we find the central paradox of Ananta, a brilliantly realized world shackled to a lackluster game. And to understand how a project ends up so divided against itself, you have to look at its history. The contradiction makes more sense when you realize Ananta isn't a new game at all. It is a ghost, haunted by the project it used to be. Before it was Ananta or Project Mugen, it had a first life as a completely different title called Hidden World Record, first revealed back in 2019. The original idea from the development studio Naked Rain was strange. It was pitched as a bug mobile game, where software glitches and broken code were intentional parts of the gameplay. After going through 3 rounds of poorly received testing, the project was effectively scrapped and rebooted. The irony, of course, is that a team that once wanted to stylize bugs as a feature is now struggling with game-crashing bugs as their biggest technical problem. You can't really make this stuff up. This history is important. It shows this isn't just another development cycle. When you consider the total development time of the project in all its forms is now over 5 years. For this team, it is a high-stakes redemption arc. You can see the pressure of that history in how they act. This is most clear in how they handled the rebranding. They gave the project a new name, Ananta, which fittingly means endless in Sanskrit. But instead of simply renaming their social media, they decided to start over from zero. This caused widespread confusion, with many assuming the project had been quietly cancelled. An action that drastic suggests a deep desire to control the story, to create a clean slate. It speaks into the immense pressure they were under, likely from their publisher NetEase, who are one of the largest video game companies in the world and aren't exactly known for patience. That pressure also seems to have affected their creative process. People have pointed out that for a game with so much ambition, some of its animations look familiar. The most obvious example is the character switching transition, which looks almost identical to the one in GTA 5. When you borrow something this heavily, you are not just being compared to other games, you are being judged against titans of the industry. This feeds into the idea that the game is struggling to find its own identity, trying to be so many other successful things at once that it risks not having a cohesive core on its own. You have a project haunted by its past, pressured by its publisher, and struggling to forge a unique identity. In that context, the flaws from the tech test start to make a lot more sense. The developers needed a trump card, a big game-changing move to win back trust and change the narrative. And as it turns out, they had one. The trump card was a decision that completely changed the conversation around the game, making millions of people pay attention. They decided to get rid of the gacha system. For years in these style of games, the main way to make money has been the gacha system. Basically a slot machine for characters. You spend currency to gamble for a chance to get the new character you want. A lot of players are tired of it. It can feel predatory and locks gameplay behind a lottery. Ananta's announcement that it would have no character gacha was a huge deal. It was a deliberate market-altering gambit, a strategic choice to separate themselves from every other major competitor. And this isn't happening in a vacuum either. Another highly anticipated title, Duet Night Abyss, made a similar pivot, also removing its character gacha. This suggests some developers think the gacha market is getting too crowded, and the best way to compete is to offer something different. And of course, the immediate reaction from many experienced players was, what's the catch? With a free-to-play game, the money has to come from somewhere. The community's specific fear is that the character gacha might be replaced by a gacha system for cosmetic skins, though it's worth noting that even this worst-case scenario is seen by many as a major improvement over, pay-gating characters, since cosmetic skins don't typically lower the gameplay experience for non-spenders. If they are not selling characters, what exactly are they selling? The answer is a cosmetic system that seems surprisingly deep and built around high player value. We have heard that players can actually disassemble clothing into individual parts to mix and match, making for a much more expressive system. To make those purchases more valuable, the outfits are reportedly compatible between all characters of the same gender and automatically adjust to fit different body types. In simple terms, you are not just buying an outfit for one character, you're buying cosmetic pieces for a huge portion of your roster forever. The value you get is much higher. So they've traded a system based on random chance for one based on player expression. It is a huge gamble, but it is also the single smartest move they have ever made, generating an incredible amount of goodwill. But the question remains, is goodwill enough to make players overlook the game's other more fundamental problems? But that is where Ananta stands now, a project of extremes, a game of almost perfect opposites. On one hand, you have a truly next-generation world simulation, exciting combat, and revolutionary player-friendly business model. On the other, you have a technical performance that, at least in the early tests, struggled on top-tier hardware. That is why this game is so important to watch, regardless of whether you plan to play it, because its success or failure will have ripple effects across the entire industry. Its mobile port specifically will be a bellwether for the future, something that indicates a trend. Ananta's mobile version is a bellwether for high-end mobile gaming. If they can get this massive console-quality city to run smoothly on a phone, it will raise the bar for every developer. If they fail, it'll be a very expensive cautionary tale about the limits of a mobile hardware, and a reminder of issues like excessive battery drain or the need for drastic content cutbacks. A successful launch would also put immense pressure on the current king of the market, HoYoverse. How do you justify selling a single character for hundreds of dollars in Genshin Impact when a direct competitor is giving all of its characters away for free? That question will hang over the entire genre. The biggest impact might be even broader than that. For years, the anime aesthetic has been tied almost exclusively to the gacha model. If a massive game like Ananta proves you can be successful without it, it might convince other publishers that the audience is here for the art and gameplay, not the gambling. And maybe, just maybe, that could lead to a resurgence of premium single-purchase anime titles, the kind of games players have been asking for a long time. So that is the story of Ananta so far. A game that could either be flawed masterpiece or a beautiful broken mess. But I am curious on what you all think, so leave your comments below. But that is all from me, 𝗖cie𝗽𝘆𝗵𝗁, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!